I'm Mick Williams, the Mayor of Strathbogie Shire. Dr Walsh, what is your position on amalgamation in regional or rural Victoria? What would you agree with that?
My position is different to Jeff's. I think the process that was begun in the 1990s needs to be revisited. Of course, in the 1990s it was a much broader process than the simple proposition of amalgamating neighbouring councils. It was a very broad process. I think if Jeff was to reach back into his mind, he might remember saying towards the end of that process that we didn't take it far enough. I think that remains true today.
Bullshit. You're probably right. At that time, I probably would have only wanted 2 councils, but I didn't think we could get away with that. But you might remember, we did it then to address the changes in communications, which became instant with telephones and now they're mobile phones, and the time it took to move goods around the state or the country, which took a long time. Now they're moving much quicker. And we said, if we're going to have these amalgamations, yes, I might have wanted to have less or more, which way you look at it, less councils or more amalgamations. But the point was, we said, once we finish this, then we've got to focus on the main job. The difficulty now is if you go back and start revisiting it, you're going to take people's mind and attention and time away from the things that matter most. And the things that matter most right now is surviving and being in a position that you can be strong enough to address some of the challenges that are going to hit us all very, very quickly if they haven't hit us already. So I respect your view, but probably wouldn't employ you again if you would continue to push that view, as we did employ you before.
Well, needless to say, I probably wouldn't work for Jeff again, given his changed views.
Thanks, John. Malcolm Hull from Wellington Shire in the heart of Gippsland. Looking out to the future, and this is to the panel, can we survive with 3 levels of government in Victoria, your upper lower house and your state and your councils, or is it time to look at having your lower house and looking at the upper house boundaries and they become regional governments, and that would encompass the local government sector, doing away with 1 level of government and having a bit more money in our pockets in the regions?
Thanks for the question. Property Council is frustrated with all levels of government, so most of the time we want to abolish the lot. Our members they often fantasise about the day when Jeff did sack all the councillors and administrators were in charge. That was the time we found the services were the most efficient of all. So I think it's not about abolishing government, it's about driving a high level of efficiency with what system we've got. You don't need to abolish a government to get a better outcome, you just need better staff, better councillors, better organisation and higher standards. Just slightly in relation to the previous question about amalgamations, I think Jeff spoke about it in his speech. It's not just about abolishing government, it's about getting government to work better. And we see local government getting a lot of efficiency gains, saving money, which either can be put into infrastructure or given back to the community by amalgamating services. Approval of planning permits don't need to be left to one council. They can be merged. Stonnington and Burundara could have the same planning department. Bayside and Glen Eira are the same. Rates don't need to be administrated by one council. They should be done by all the councils should have a central authority, rationalise their staff and get that part to do it. In Canada, I'll pass the microphone to another person in a second, but in Canada, their tax office collects taxes for their provinces and the national government. They don't even have state revenue offices over there. So if you can do it for a national government, councils can certainly do it inside a state as small as Victoria. And I think that's where you get these gains in terms of government outcomes.
I think certainly a case can be made for the better integration of the three levels of government, but I do agree with Jeff on this matter. It's a task so challenging that it will never happen. But one area of integration that does need to be looked at and could be looked at in the not too distant future involves the integration of local government authorities, water authorities and catchment management authorities. In the reform process back in the 90s, you'll recall, prior to it, local government authorities really had responsibility, particularly in rural and regional areas, for those three areas. We needed to separate the water authorities out for reasons to do with the need to reform water institutions in themselves, but also to facilitate the local government reform process. I'm not suggesting that we ought to be looking at a complete reintegration of these three sets of authorities, but certainly from the point of view of future boundaries, a case can be made insofar as rural and regional Victoria in the future for local government boundaries that align with existing water authority boundaries and catchment management boundaries, so that the planning issues involving all three can be better dealt with.
If we were starting again, had a white piece of paper, we'd only have two tiers of government, and you'd probably have a federal government and larger municipal councils. And you may have, I've just come back from overseas where I keep looking at these things. I've been in Turkey, there's 75 million people, and they have federal government, they have provinces, and the provinces are like large municipalities that have, a couple of leaders and off they go. We are over-governed, there is no doubt. But the difficulty in actually changing it without having thought it through is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and might succeed. I mean, I've often thought of going to the election and promising to abolish the upper house. Well, I think I'd get 95% support of the public in terms of the Houses of Parliament. If you said you were going to abolish Victorian Parliament or municipal, I think there'd be more difficulty. So therefore I tend to focus on trying to make what we've got work better. But I'd even go further in terms of just planning issues. At CT Management now, we're actually looking at working with a group of councils in rural areas, 5 I think it is, to put together all their backroom services. So it's not just planning, it could also be accounting. I mean, the public don't give a damn where the sort of accounting is done. They need just to see the outcomes. They want to look at the level of the rates. They want to see whether they're getting their local kindergartens, etc. So there are a lot of areas where groups of councils could actually share services, and this is why I think the challenges that we're facing today, in many cases being forced on us, are very exciting. And it's where you're going to see some councils break through doing the norm and trying things differently. And I think that's what the Victorian Minister is looking for. She's looking for leadership from councils or groups of councils. And I think that's what your communities are going to want as well. So it is planning issues. It's a whole lot of things. The beauty about keeping the number of councils, therefore, means that there is still someone connecting with community members. And the big criticism of our amalgamations, of course, was that we were taking away access to so-called elected representatives. Well, that was the price we had to pay to try and put in a new base. I accept that and wear it. But I think now there is time for another stage. But the other stage now is better utilising technology and skills, particularly when there are, I genuinely believe, a shortage of a lot of good people at a lot of different levels to do certain jobs in local government. So therefore, if you could bring about a sharing arrangement between groups of councils as a starting point, you'd make huge savings, which could then be directed to other things that might have a higher priority.
Hi, my name's Sue Hamilton. I come from Mount Barker Council in South Australia, so I'm probably coming from a little bit of a different perspective from Victoria. I have to say, Jeff Kennett, I agreed with virtually everything you said.
Well, then sit down, please. Don't go any further.
It's okay. No, but I thought you made some very pertinent statements. But I just want to make one comment about elected councillors. It's incredibly difficult to get the finest minds as elected councillors when we actually are on such low pay, and that means that a lot of the councillors are actually retirees who are often sick. And so half the councillors carry the whole council, and they do it at great expense to their own income. That's just one point I want to make, and so it's a huge sacrifice if you've got good education actually to go into local government. But I just want to make a comment to Asher when he said that national and state decisions, we're going to get them whether we like it or not. You know, for me, this is pretty distressing, because I would have thought from what Jeff was saying that you're coming to us with the perspective that communities now should be presenting health and wellbeing. That this is now the new breaking edge thing. We've got a declining economy across the world. It's going to hit Australia. Sustainable food and health and wellbeing and community cooperation are the future. This is going to surpass economic development. And I was actually doing some sums about how much money you guys are going to make out of your apartments. And if you're selling them between $400 and $500, $1,000 rather, for a single apartment, and you're putting in the number of apartments you are across Melbourne, you're going to make huge amounts of money. And your contribution to local government actually should be more than it is. Because in Mount Barker, we've been asked to double our population without any services or infrastructure from state government. Developer contribution wasn't put in place before the land was zoned. So now our council is going to ask its ratepayers to try and subsidise this. This is impossible.
Look, thank you for your question. It's an important issue. I just want to clarify something. I think I gave you 2-bedroom apartment figures, not 1-bedroom apartment. 1-bedroom will be cheaper. So maybe we'll have a chat afterwards. It's if you over $100,000 cheaper, because obviously there's less space in it. So maybe I'll find you afterwards. In regards to population growth, look, I think, and national priorities, state priorities and local government, I think one of the big problems in this country is we don't teach civics in schools. People don't know where responsibility for government begins and ends. I think I was driving off the Eastern Freeway the other day, and I think it was on the town hall out there, the local council was for Afghan refugees or something like that. And I thought, that's wonderful. But local government isn't responsible for foreign policy or immigration policy. It's got to provide services to people affected by it. But that's why we pay taxes to the federal government. It's their job. Their job is to decide the national population targets, or if we want to grow or shrink. Local government's got important responsibilities, but there is a area where it's just not your problem. You're not elected to solve that or deal with that. It's the state government's problem. And because the tax system is such a mess, and state governments don't have enough money and local governments have a small tax base, there's lots of cost shifting and everybody gets involved in different spaces. But I think it doesn't help by growing into the spaces you want to affect change in. You need to stick to the areas that you're ultimately responsible for, because it just encourages more confusion. So I respectfully, I don't agree with you. I think local government just has to accept it and deal with it. If they don't like it, if councils don't like it, they should stand for federal parliament or the Senate, join a because that's where you can actually enact change. I think I'll pass it on to someone else in a sec, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is, if different levels of government have different responsibilities. If you want to affect change in that area, stand for that level of government. Don't do it from the wrong level.
Just in terms of your first point, because I can't afford to buy anything because I've been a public servant like you all my life, and I'm getting older, and I've got illness and all sorts of issues. But in terms of training, it's the best investment a council could ever make. And we're looking at options now of training those who want to stand for council, which would not be obligatory. But if people want to do a short course, when they stood as candidates, they could put against their name, Jeff Kennett, a rubber stamp which says, I've done the course. Or when councillors are just elected, to very quickly go to a 2 or 3 day two-day course just to tell them the fundamentals of what councils are about, how they work, who are the officers, what are their responsibilities. Because so many councillors, as you will know, actually try and be officers rather than being a board overseeing and agreeing to strategy and everything else. So I think it's not necessarily a cost for the councillors, but it is the best investment a council can make to make. It's not hard if you run the business well. It's made harder, and it happened a bit after the amalgamations, after we had the pause in rates and everything else, and you were released from that constraint. People started spending money very quickly on a whole range of things. But if you work on the basis that you've got to live within your means, and you do your asset management well, and you look at your sustainability and the gaps that Greg was talking about, you can plan for the future. And that's when you've got to talk to your community. And it's what I say, community expectation, ratepayer expectation is so important, so you need to have a good communication system. But it can be done. It's not difficult. I mean, if you have a look at industry today, there are a lot of industries who have made some terrible mistakes. My friends at Fairfax would be one, and their company is all over the place at the moment. Billabong, the best retail brand that we had around the world, has been stuffed up by its board because they overextended, right? They didn't live within their means. And that company now, which was the only international retail company we had, is now on its knees. So, and there are a number of councils that are going through difficulties at the moment, some of which we at CT Management are working with, others which are working with the local government department here, etc. But if you do the right things, if you plan for the long term rather than the short, while there may be some hiccups in the short term, you can get the ship upright. And that's fundamentally what happened here in Victoria. In 92 to 99, we had this huge debt, we had this huge deficit. It took us 7 years, but we got it back on its foot. And that's what's given us the resilience that's followed, and the fact that successive governments have fundamentally pursued the policies that we did up until more recently. So I'm not pessimistic about the capacity. It's actually the will. Have you got the strategy? Have you got, well, certainly, firstly, have you got the vision? Do you know what your vision is for the council? Have you got the strategy? Have you got the people? Is there consistency of message? And then, what is the reward that you're going to be offering the ratepayer? Is the reward going to be a vital community, exciting community? Is it going to be a community with better infrastructure? Is it be a community with lower rates? And that's what the community has got to decide. But it can only decide it through appropriate leadership. If there's no leadership, you will get eaten alive, as you know, by your community. They'll just keep asking for more and you'll keep giving in. The next thing you'll know, you're up before the local government minister because you've got a mendicant council. So it's not difficult. But if you get the process right, get the people, that's what's exciting. That's the challenge.